Imagine holding in your hands a piece of paper that could buy a house, a farm, 100 horses. Now imagine watching that same piece of paper, just 10 years later, become so worthless that merchants would refuse to accept a stack of them for a single bowl of rice. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This is not economic theory. This is exactly what happened in the largest empire the world has ever known, an empire so vast that a rider could travel for a year and never leave its borders. The Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan conducted the greatest monetary experiment in human history, the first large-scale use of paper currency backed by nothing but government decree. For a time, it seemed like magic. Wealth could be created from mulberry bark and ink. Armies could be paid without gold. Trade could flourish without the burden of metal. The empire grew richer than any before it. And then, slowly at first, then with terrifying speed, the magic died. The paper that had bought empires became worthless. The economy that had been the wonder of the world collapsed into chaos. Peasants starved. Merchants abandoned their trades. And the mightiest empire ever built crumbled from within, destroyed not by enemy armies but by the pieces of paper it had printed. What you are about to learn is the first great lesson in what happens when governments discover they can create money from nothing. It is a lesson that has been repeated throughout history, and it is being repeated right now, in ways that will affect your life whether you understand it or not. The story begins not with economics but with conquest. In the early 13th century, the Mongol tribes united under a brilliant and ruthless leader named Temujin, who would become known to history as Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. From the steppes of Mongolia, he launched a campaign of conquest that would reshape the world. His armies swept across Asia like a storm, destroying kingdoms that had stood for centuries, building an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the borders of Europe. By the time of his death in 1227, Genghis Khan ruled more territory than any human being before or since. But Genghis Khan was not merely a destroyer. He was also a builder, and he understood something that many conquerors miss: an empire is not just territory but systems. He created a legal code, the Yasa, that unified his diverse subjects under common laws. He established the Yam, a sophisticated postal system that could carry messages across the vast empire in days rather than months. He protected merchants and facilitated trade, understanding that commerce enriched his realm more sustainably than plunder. And he did all this while using traditional money, gold, silver, silk, and other commodities that had served as currency since the dawn of civilization. It was his grandson, Kublai Khan, who would change everything. Kublai was different from his predecessors. He had been raised partly in Chinese culture, educated by Chinese scholars, and fascinated by Chinese civilization in a way that earlier Mongol rulers had not been. When he became Great Khan in 1260, he inherited an empire that was already beginning to fragment. The Western Khanates were becoming increasingly independent. The old Mongol aristocracy resisted his Chinese-influenced ways. He needed to consolidate power, and to do that, he needed money. Traditional money, however, presented problems. Gold and silver were heavy, difficult to transport across the vast distances of the empire. More importantly, there wasn't enough of them. The Mongol conquests had captured enormous treasuries, but running an empire required constant expenditure. Armies needed to be paid. Officials needed salaries. Infrastructure needed to be built and maintained. The precious metal supplies were finite, but the needs of the empire seemed infinite. It was in this context that Kublai Khan made the decision that would define his economic legacy and ultimately destroy his dynasty. He would create money from paper. The concept was not entirely new. The Chinese had experimented with paper money for centuries, with varying degrees of success. Earlier dynasties had used paper notes as supplements to metal currency, sometimes successfully, sometimes disastrously. But no one had ever attempted what Kublai Khan would attempt, a completely fiat currency, paper money backed by nothing but the authority of the state, mandatory for all transactions throughout the largest empire in human history. The new currency was called Chow, and its creation was a marvel of medieval engineering. The paper was made from mulberry bark, carefully processed into a material that was durable yet difficult to counterfeit. Each note was printed with elaborate designs, official seals, and warnings of severe punishment for counterfeiting. The notes came in various denominations, from small values for everyday transactions to large values for major purchases. And most importantly, they were declared legal tender throughout the empire. By imperial decree, all subjects were required to accept paper money for all transactions. Gold and silver could be exchanged for paper at government offices, but could not be used directly in commerce. Merchants who refused paper money faced severe penalties. The old metal currencies were systematically withdrawn from circulation. For the first few years, the system worked brilliantly. Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant who visited Kublai Khan's court and spent 17 years in the empire, was astonished by what he saw. In his famous account, he described the paper money system with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. Here was the great Khan, he wrote, who could create wealth simply by printing it. The paper cost almost nothing to produce, yet it could purchase anything in the empire. It was, Marco Polo said, as if the Khan had discovered the secret of alchemy, turning worthless bark into unlimited gold. The economic logic seemed impeccable. Trade flourished because merchants no longer needed to transport heavy metal over dangerous roads. Tax collection became more efficient because paper was easier to count and store. The government could fund ambitious projects, palaces, canals, military campaigns, without the constraints of finite metal supplies. The economy grew. Cities prospered. The Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan became the richest realm the world had ever seen. But there was a problem, a fatal flaw that would not become apparent for years but was built into the system from the beginning. The same feature that made paper money so attractive to the government, the ability to create it at will, made it ultimately unsustainable. When you can create money from nothing, the temptation to create more is irresistible. And when you create more money without creating more goods, you do not create more wealth. You simply divide the existing wealth into smaller pieces. The first signs of trouble appeared in the 1270s. Kublai Khan had launched ambitious military campaigns, invasions of Japan, Burma, Vietnam, and Java, all of which failed expensively. The invasions of Japan were particularly costly. Twice, in 1274 and 1281, massive fleets were assembled at enormous expense, only to be destroyed by typhoons that the Japanese called kamikaze, the divine wind. These military disasters consumed resources without generating any return. But they still needed to be paid for. The solution was obvious, at least to the government. Print more money. The new notes were issued to pay soldiers, to compensate officials, to fund the endless needs of empire. At first, the inflation was barely noticeable. Prices rose a little, but wages rose too, and people adjusted. The government insisted that the money was still valuable, and for a time, because everyone believed it, it was. But the printing continued. Each year, the government faced new expenses and chose to meet them with new currency rather than increased taxation or reduced spending. The money supply grew and grew. By the 1280s, prices had begun rising noticeably. By the 1290s, the rise had become alarming. Goods that had cost 1 note now cost 10. Then 20. Then 100. The government's response to inflation was to print more money. When old notes lost their value, new notes were issued, theoretically at higher values. But these new notes too began to lose value almost as soon as they were printed. It was a race that the government could not win, a race against the very money it was creating. Each new issue triggered more inflation, which required more printing, which triggered more inflation still. By the turn of the 14th century, the paper money system was in crisis. The notes that had once been treasured were now treated with contempt. Merchants demanded payment in commodities rather than paper. Black markets emerged where transactions were conducted in rice, silk, or metal, anything but the worthless government currency. The elaborate system of government exchange offices, where paper could be converted to metal at fixed rates, broke down entirely when the government ran out of metal to exchange. The paper that had been backed by imperial authority was now backed by nothing at all. The social consequences were devastating. Those who had saved money in the form of paper notes, ordinary families who had worked hard and set aside provisions for the future, watched their life savings evaporate. A merchant who had accumulated what seemed like a fortune in paper currency discovered that his fortune could no longer buy a month's provisions. The careful and the prudent were destroyed, while the reckless and the indebted found their obligations melting away. It was a massive, silent transfer of wealth from those who had trusted the government to those who had not. The political consequences were equally severe. Peasants who could no longer afford seed or tools abandoned their fields. Workers who found their wages worthless rioted in the cities. The elaborate infrastructure of Mongol rule, the postal system, the roads, the canals, fell into disrepair as the government could no longer pay for their maintenance. Regional authorities, seeing the center weaken, began asserting independence. The empire that had been united by wealth now fragmented in poverty. By the 1350s, the situation had become catastrophic. The paper money had become so worthless that the government itself stopped accepting it for tax payments, an implicit admission that its own currency was valueless. Natural disasters, floods along the Yellow River, epidemics that swept through crowded cities, combined with economic collapse to create conditions ripe for revolution. The revolt when it came was led not by a rival warlord or a foreign invader, but by a peasant, a former monk named Zhu Yuanzhang. He had been born into poverty, orphaned young, reduced to begging at a Buddhist monastery. He had no education, no connections, no resources. What he had was an understanding of the suffering around him and the organizational ability to channel that suffering into revolution. His Red Turban Rebellion began as one of many peasant uprisings but grew to engulf the empire. The Mongol government, bankrupt and discredited, could neither pay armies to suppress the revolt nor command loyalty from subjects it had impoverished. In 1368, Zhu Yuanzhang captured the capital and declared himself the first emperor of a new dynasty. He chose the name Ming, meaning bright or brilliant, deliberately contrasting his new order with the darkness of Mongol misrule. The Yuan dynasty, the Mongol rule over China, was finished. An empire that had begun with the world's greatest conqueror ended less than a century later, destroyed not by a stronger army but by pieces of printed paper. The new Ming emperor had learned from his predecessors' mistakes, at least initially. He returned to metal currency, understanding that the paper money experiment had been a disaster. For a generation, China operated on a hard money system, and the economy slowly recovered from the devastation of the yuan collapse. But the temptation of paper money proved too strong even for the Ming. Later emperors would return to printing, and later emperors would face the same inflationary consequences, though never quite on the scale of the yuan catastrophe. What makes the Mongol hyperinflation particularly instructive is not just its scale but its duration. Unlike modern hyperinflations, which typically burn through their destructive course in months or a few years, the Mongol inflation unfolded over nearly a century. This slow-motion catastrophe allowed observers to watch and record every stage of the process. We can trace the evolution from sound money to worthless paper in meticulous detail, seeing exactly how each government decision led to predictable consequences. The first stage was the initial adoption of paper money, presented as a modern innovation that would facilitate trade and free the economy from the constraints of metal. This was accurate as far as it went. Paper money does have genuine advantages over metal currency, advantages that remain valid today. The problem was not the paper itself but what came next. The second stage was the discovery that paper money could be created without limit. As long as people accepted the paper, the government could pay its bills simply by printing more. This created an illusion of infinite wealth that proved irresistible to rulers facing finite resources and infinite demands. The third stage was the first inflationary spiral, when the government printed money to cover deficits, causing prices to rise, which created larger deficits, which required more printing. At this point, the process had acquired its own momentum. Even if rulers had wanted to stop printing, the obligations created by previous printing made stopping politically impossible. The fourth stage was the collapse of confidence, when people stopped believing the government's assurances that the money was valuable. Once confidence was lost, no amount of printing could restore it. The money became worthless not because of anything inherent in the paper but because no one believed it was worth anything anymore. Value, in the end, was a matter of collective belief, and collective belief, once lost, could not be recovered by decree. The fifth and final stage was systemic collapse, when the worthlessness of money spread to destroy the economic and political systems that depended on it. Trade collapsed because no one knew what anything was worth. Government collapsed because it could not pay its servants or its soldiers. Social order collapsed because the contracts and obligations that held society together became unenforceable. This five-stage pattern is not unique to the Mongol experience. It has repeated itself throughout history with remarkable consistency. The Roman Empire debased its metal currency in a process that unfolded over centuries but followed the same essential logic. Revolutionary France issued paper assignats that collapsed within years. Weimar Germany printed marks until a wheelbarrow of currency could not buy a loaf of bread. Zimbabwe in the 21st century experienced inflation that made its currency literally worthless. Venezuela today follows the same path. The details differ, but the pattern is identical. What the Mongol example teaches us, more clearly than any other, is that paper money is not inherently dangerous. It is a tool, like any other, that can be used wisely or foolishly. Used wisely, with restraint and discipline, paper money offers genuine advantages over metal currency. It is lighter, more convenient, easier to divide and transport. A modern economy could not function with gold coins alone. But paper money also offers a temptation that metal money does not. You cannot print gold. You cannot create silver by decree. The limitations of metal money, which seem like constraints, are actually protections. They force governments to live within their means, to balance spending against revenue, to make difficult choices rather than papering over problems with fresh currency. Paper money removes these protections, and history suggests that governments, given the ability to print money without limit, will eventually do exactly that. The Mongol emperors were not stupid. They understood, at least initially, that unlimited printing would cause inflation. They issued edicts limiting the currency supply. They punished counterfeiters with death. They tried to maintain confidence through propaganda and coercion. But when faced with the choice between printing money and making painful cuts to spending, they chose to print. When faced with the choice between short-term survival and long-term stability, they chose short-term survival. They were not uniquely weak or uniquely foolish. They were simply human, responding to incentives in predictable ways. The same incentives exist today, and the same responses are visible. Consider the extraordinary monetary expansion that has occurred in major economies over the past 15 years. Following the financial crisis of 2008, central banks around the world engaged in unprecedented money creation, purchasing trillions of dollars in assets with newly created currency. This was called quantitative easing, a technical term that obscured its essential nature, printing money on a scale that would have astounded Kublai Khan. The response to the COVID-19 pandemic was even more dramatic, with trillions more created in months. The money supply of major economies has doubled and tripled in a single generation. The response to this observation is often that modern economies are different, that modern central bankers are wiser, that modern institutions provide checks and balances that medieval empires lacked. Perhaps this is true. Perhaps the lessons of history no longer apply, and we have discovered some technique for creating money without consequence that eluded every previous civilization. But perhaps not. The inflation that emerged in 2021 and 2022, after years of money creation, was initially dismissed as transitory, temporary, a brief adjustment that would resolve itself. This is exactly what officials in Kublai Khan's court said in the 1280s. Prices are rising, they acknowledged, but the rise is temporary, and the currency is sound. The similarities are uncomfortable for anyone who knows what happened next. The $100 billion figure in the title of this exploration is, of course, an approximation, an attempt to translate medieval values into modern terms. The precise number matters less than the magnitude. The Mongol hyperinflation destroyed wealth on a scale that had never been seen before, impoverishing millions, destabilizing the largest empire in history, and ultimately bringing down a dynasty. It did this not through war or natural disaster but through the simple, seductive, ultimately destructive power of creating money from nothing. What makes money valuable is not the material it is made from but the belief that others will accept it in exchange for goods and services. This belief is fragile. It is built over years through consistent policy and reliable value. It can be destroyed in months through reckless printing and broken promises. The Mongol emperors inherited a currency backed by the prestige of Genghis Khan's conquests, the wealth of China's economy, and the power of the world's greatest empire. They squandered this inheritance in less than a century, leaving their descendants with worthless paper and a collapsing realm. The questions this history raises for our present moment are profound and uncomfortable. Are modern currencies following the same path that led the Mongol Chow from trusted medium of exchange to worthless paper? Are modern governments making the same choices, for the same reasons, that Mongol emperors made 7 centuries ago? Is the extraordinary expansion of money supply we have witnessed in recent years the beginning of a process that ends, as such processes have always ended, in the destruction of the currency and the impoverishment of those who trusted it? These are not rhetorical questions. They are genuine uncertainties that will be resolved only by time. What history can tell us is that the pattern exists, that it has repeated itself across cultures and centuries, and that no civilization has yet found a way to print money without limit and avoid the consequences. The Mongol experience is not just a story about the past. It is a warning about the future, written in the ruins of the greatest empire the world has ever known. Kublai Khan died in 1294, old and troubled, watching his empire begin the long decline that would end in its destruction. He had ruled longer than any Mongol emperor before him. He had built palaces that astonished visitors from every corner of the world. He had commanded armies that stretched to the horizon. But he had also planted the seeds of his dynasty's destruction, seeds that would grow into a forest of worthless paper that choked the empire he had struggled to build. In the markets of modern Beijing, built on the ruins of Kublai Khan's capital, merchants accept electronic payments for their goods, digital currencies that exist only as numbers in computer networks. These digital tokens are even more abstract than the mulberry bark notes of the Yuan dynasty, even further removed from any tangible backing. They work because people believe they work, because the system maintains confidence through consistent value and reliable exchange. But the lesson of Kublai Khan's paper money remains: value is belief, and belief, once lost, cannot be decreed into existence. Every piece of paper money you hold, every digital balance in your accounts, exists because of a collective agreement that these symbols represent value. This agreement has held for generations in most modern economies. It has survived wars and recessions and political upheavals. But it is not guaranteed to survive forever. Nothing in history is guaranteed forever. The only question is whether we will learn from the experiences of those who came before us or whether we will repeat their mistakes, confident in our modernity, until we discover that the patterns of history apply to us as surely as they applied to the subjects of Kublai Khan. The merchants of 13th century China believed their currency was permanent and their empire eternal. They were wrong. We would be wise to consider whether our own certainties are any better founded. If this journey through the rise and fall of history's first great paper money experiment has changed how you think about currency and value, I would be fascinated to hear your perspective. What do you see when you look at modern monetary policy through the lens of Mongol history? Do you believe we have learned from these mistakes, or do you see the same patterns repeating? These are questions without easy answers, questions that deserve serious discussion and diverse viewpoints. And if this exploration has given you something valuable, something worth sharing with others who might benefit from understanding these historical patterns, you know what to do. For those who want to continue exploring the hidden connections between past and present, the patterns that shape our world in ways we rarely discuss, the next story is waiting. History has so much more to teach us, if only we are willing to learn.